There are worlds in the Imperium that exist only to be forgotten. They are not charted for beauty or glory, nor visited by pilgrims or soldiers. They exist to bleed. The Administratum calls them resource assets, but to those born there, they are tombs of stone and smoke. The air is thick with iron and static, the ground broken by the weight of drills that have been running since the Emperor still walked among men. These are the mining worlds, planetary lungs that breathe dust and exhale death. And within their endless pits, the screams of the living are drowned out by the hum of machines that never stop. When you step onto a mining world, you feel the weight of it before you see it. Gravity presses down like judgment. The air burns your throat with each breath, carrying the taste of rust and oil. The sky is a dim bruise, clouded by centuries of soot and orbital debris. Mountains no longer exist as nature made them. They have been hollowed out, reshaped into tiered scars where endless conveyor lines carry rock and bodies alike. The wind doesn't blow freely. It crawls, heavy with particulate ash, coating every surface in gray. To touch anything is to stain yourself with the planet's decay. The people here are not born. They are issued. Most never see the sky. Generations have lived and died beneath the surface, their entire lives spent in tunnels carved by their ancestors' hands. Families are divided by shift, not by bloodline. A father might die in shaft 12 while his son works shaft 14, never realizing that the dust settling on his skin is part of his father's remains. Every breath carries history, but no one calls it that. They call it air, and it is the most expensive thing they own. Life underground is governed by rhythm. The drills pound in steady intervals, creating a kind of industrial heartbeat that every worker unconsciously matches. Sleep, wake, labor, breathe, repeat, an unending litany of survival. The sound becomes so constant that silence itself is terrifying. Silence means failure, or collapse, or death. To the miners, the noise of the drills is prayer, the only sound that means they still have a purpose. Down in the deepest levels, the light fades to a greenish hue, filtered through layers of grime and radiation fog. Lumens flicker and die without warning, leaving men blind for minutes at a time. When that happens, no one moves. To walk in the dark is to vanish forever. There are old shafts, sealed long ago, where something still moves in the dark. Something that rattles like loose metal and whispers in voices that are almost human. The workers don't talk about it openly, but every mine has its forbidden zones. Places marked by rusted icons of the Aquila half scratched away, where the Omnissiah's blessing has long since faded. Food is another cruelty. Rations are thin, processed from the fungus that grows on tunnel walls, flavored with traces of promethium dust and despair. Water is rationed more tightly than life itself. The miners drink condensation from the walls, filtered through centuries of decay. It is said that the water down there has memory, that when you drink it, you taste the screams of those who drowned during old collapses. Whether that is truth or superstition doesn't matter. In the Imperium, both are the same. The overseers walk among them like gods of flesh and iron. Their armor shines even in the dim light, polished to reflect the faintest flicker of lumen glow. Each carries a shock maul and a data slate, recording productivity ratios that decide who eats and who starves. They are not cruel because they enjoy it. They are cruel because cruelty is all that keeps the mine alive. Discipline is oxygen. Hope is poison. Any man caught whispering of freedom or mercy is taken to the upper levels, never to return. The rumor says they are reassigned. The truth is that reassignment means becoming a servitor. Body stripped of memory, mind wired into the machinery that grinds the ore. It is the closest thing this place has to promotion. The ecclesiarchy's priests come rarely, but when they do, they bring sermons carved into steel. They stand on platforms above the workers and shout blessings through vox grills clogged with soot. Their voices echo like thunder through the tunnels, promising salvation through labor. Each swing of the pick is a prayer, they say, each wound a tithe of faith. The miners repeat the words without conviction, because to refuse is death, but to believe is madness. Faith offers no air, no food, no escape, only endurance. Some still whisper of old rebellions. Stories pass from one generation to the next about miners who rose up against their overseers and sealed themselves inside the tunnels, choosing starvation over servitude. No record of these revolts exists, of course. The Imperium does not acknowledge disobedience, but sometimes, when the tunnels go quiet, you can hear tapping from beyond the walls, rhythmic, patient, as though the dead are still digging somewhere deeper, trying to finish the work they began. Above ground, the world is a wasteland of skeletal structures and slag fields. The wind howls across dunes made not of sand but of powdered rock and bone. Massive crawler vehicles move across the horizon like slow metal beasts, their treads churning the planet's crust into ash. From orbit, the world glows faintly red, its atmosphere permanently scarred by centuries of extraction. It is beautiful in a way, the beauty of a wound that never heals. At the planet's equator stands the Tithe Spire, a black tower rising miles high, where the collected ore is purified and sent to orbit. It is said that the spire hums at night with the voices of those who died in its furnaces. The glow from its chimneys is visible even underground, a distant flicker that miners mistake for stars. They call it the false sky. Children are told that if they ever make it to the surface, they'll see that light and know they are still home. But the truth is, no one who reaches the spire ever comes back. In the archives of the Administratum, this world is known as Hraxus Nigh, classified as a Category C mineral production world. Population, 3.7 billion. Output, 99.7% efficiency. Deviation, negligible. But numbers cannot feel the weight of dust on the skin, the slow erosion of the human spirit. The report does not mention that the sun has not been visible in living memory, nor that the people's eyes have adapted to the dark, their irises pale and colorless. It does not record that children are taught to swing pickaxes before they learn to speak, or that laughter is considered a waste of breath. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintain the machinery, but they rarely speak to the miners. They move like ghosts through the tunnels, robed figures of brass and black, their faces hidden by respirator masks, their limbs clicking with mechanical rhythm. When they do speak, it is to the machines, not the people. The miners call them the listeners, because they seem to hear something no one else can. A low-frequency hum that seeps through the rock, vibrating in the bones. The priests of the Omnissiah claim it is the sound of the machine spirit dreaming. Others say it is the world itself, weeping under the weight of exploitation. And yet, for all this horror, there is no rebellion, no uprising, only survival. The Imperium has perfected obedience through despair. The people of Hraxus 9 do not imagine freedom because they cannot imagine anything else. The stars above are myths, the sky a story told by the insane. To dream is to die slower. Better to keep working. Better to swing, breathe, endure. But in the lowest shaft, a place so deep it is not marked on any chart, something has begun to stir. Workers there have reported strange phenomena. Tools vibrating on their own, rocks glowing faintly with internal light, whispers echoing through the walls long after shift end. One worker, a young woman named Jera, claimed she saw a reflection of herself in the stone, not as she is, but as something made of fire and iron. When she tried to touch it, the reflection reached back. She was found later, burned to ash, her shadow seared permanently into the rock face. The overseers dismissed it as hysteria. The Mechanicus blamed radiation pockets. The ecclesiarchy called it punishment for doubt. But the miners know better. They've begun to leave offerings near the site. Bits of scrap metal, broken picks, fragments of teeth. Primitive, desperate gestures, but born of something new. Belief. Not in the Emperor, not in salvation. In the earth itself. In the possibility that the world beneath them might one day remember it was alive. At night, when the drills finally stop for maintenance, a rare silence fills the tunnels. The air feels thick with waiting. Somewhere in that dark, the hum grows louder. Not mechanical, not human, but something in between. The sound crawls up the metal shafts, winding through every corridor, seeping into dreams. Some claim it forms words ancient and low, "We see you." Others say it is only the wind, trapped in the hollow bones of a dying planet. But deep below, where the dust has never been disturbed and the rock still holds the warmth of creation, a single pulse echoes, slow, steady, like the heartbeat of something that was never meant to die. The minds of Hraxus never sleep. Even when the lumens dim to half-light and the alarms fade into background static, the planet still moves, shifting, creaking, groaning under the weight of its own wounds. The sound is constant, an ocean of machinery gnawing at the crust. Every piston stroke and hammer blow is a syllable in a language of suffering that only the dead can truly understand. To live here is to exist beneath the weight of ore, both the metal and the meaning. The ore crushes the body, but the meaning breaks the soul. Each day begins with the siren, a low mechanical howl that vibrates through the tunnels and straight into the chest. The miners rise from the sleeping alcoves carved into the stone walls, their bodies moving automatically before their minds even wake. They are creatures of habit, trained from birth to obey the rhythm of the machine. The siren is their dawn, the shift their day, the silence their night. For most, this is all they will ever know. In the main shafts, The air is thick with grit that never settles. The drills bite into the stone like hungry beasts, spraying clouds of powdered mineral into the air. Workers cover their mouths with cloth, but it does nothing. The dust gets everywhere. Into lungs, into eyes, into the blood. It turns the inside of the body into stone. After a decade underground, even breathing becomes a kind of excavation. The miners call it stone cough. The medici call it terminal. The administratum calls it acceptable. There are no rest days. There is only pause for maintenance, when workers repair the same machines that will break them again tomorrow. Each shift lasts until the overseer's chrono says it's done. Sometimes that means 12 hours, sometimes 30. The body learns to ignore hunger, thirst, even sleep. Only pain remains constant, and pain is the one thing that reminds them they're still human. The ore they dig is not valuable by itself. It is raw promethium shale, toxic, unstable, requiring endless purification before it can be used. To touch it without protection burns the skin. To breathe near it for too long corrodes the lungs. Yet the Imperium demands it in staggering quantities. Entire regiments depend on it. Starships require it to burn through the void. The wars of humanity are fought on its fumes. And so the miners dig, their lives feeding an empire that will never remember their names. Sometimes a shipment is delayed. Sometimes the yield falls below quota. When that happens, the overseers march through the tunnels with their shock mauls and data slates, counting, calculating, and deciding who will pay. Punishment is not personal. It is procedural. A body is selected at random and made example of. The others watch in silence, not out of cruelty but out of self-preservation. If they look away, they are next. If they speak, they disappear. In the darkness, justice is whatever keeps the drills turning. The work gangs are divided by color. Red tags for loaders, blue for haulers, gray for the tunnelers who go deepest. The grays rarely return. The deeper they dig, the closer they come to something the Mechanicus calls core interference, though no one knows what that means. Those who return from deep shafts are changed, pale, trembling, their pupils dilated until their eyes look black. They mutter to themselves in a language no one recognizes. Then, after a few shifts, they vanish. The overseers claim they were reassigned to surface duty, but everyone knows better. The mine eats what it cannot use. Every month, the tithe inspectors arrive. Pallid men in sealed rebreathers, flanked by Skitarii escorts. They do not speak to the miners. They walk through the tunnels like phantoms, scanning, measuring, logging efficiency into glowing data slates. Their boots leave no sound. Their presence freezes the workers into silence. The inspectors never remove their masks, as if the air itself offends them. When they finish, they leave with a single verdict. Output sufficient. Continue production. Then they are gone, leaving only the echo of their machines behind. Children work beside adults. There are no schools, only tunnels. A child's education is measured in tonnage moved and accidents survived. The small ones are useful. They fit into cracks and vents where adults cannot. When they get stuck, the overseers do not send rescue crews. They fill the gap with stonecrete and mark it sealed. A body in the wall means the structure holds. The miners have learned not to cry over it. The tears turn to mud before they hit the ground. Every shift, before the drills begin, a priest of the ecclesiarchy recites the litany of labor. He stands on an elevated platform, his voice amplified through vox amplifiers that distort it into a metallic growl. The prayer is less about faith than obedience. By his will, we toil. By his light, we endure. In his name, we break ourselves for the glory of man. The miners repeat the words in unison, not because they believe, but because the sound keeps them from hearing the scream of the drills. The priest blesses the machines with incense that smells of oil and rot. When he leaves, the scent lingers for hours, mixing with the stench of sweat and blood until it becomes part of the air itself. The miners do not see themselves as slaves. They see themselves as necessary. The Imperium has taught them that suffering is sanctity. The more pain they endure, the closer they come to purity. It is a lie, of course, but it is the only lie that keeps them from collapse. To admit the truth, that their lives mean nothing, would be to stop digging. And if they stop digging, they die anyway. Once each year, a shipment departs for the void. The workers gather at the edge of the loading pits to watch the massive ore lifts ascend through the atmosphere, glowing red against the clouds. They call it Ascension Day. For a brief moment, the sky lights up. Some of them whisper that maybe, if the Emperor truly watches, he'll see them then, covered in soot, unarmed, unthanked, but still serving. When the glow fades, they return to work. There is nothing else to do. There are few holidays. The one they remember most is Purge Night. Once a decade, the Overseer's office declares a cleansing. Production halts. The tunnels are sealed. and the priests of the Omnissiah descend with their machine choirs to re-sanctify the equipment. What actually happens during the night no one truly knows. The sound of chanting and metal grinding fills the tunnels for hours. When the workers return, some machines have been replaced, others are gone, and in the walls they sometimes find handprints pressed into the stone, too small to belong to any servitor. The Mechanicus claim that the mines must remain operational for 10,000 more years. They speak of planetary veins as if the world itself were a living creature, one that bleeds iron instead of blood. The miners laugh when they hear this. If the world is alive, they say, then it's been screaming for centuries. Yet, within the despair, small fragments of life persist. In the brief moments between shifts, the miners gather around lumen vents and share ghost stories. They talk of creatures seen moving in the dark, pale figures that watch from the tunnels, their eyes glowing faintly red. Some say they are the souls of those who died underground, turned to dust but still digging. Others say they are the Emperor's forgotten children, left to rot where his light never shines. No one knows for sure, but everyone listens. Fear, after all, is a kind of company. The older miners tell a story of the first shaft ever dug, a hole that went so deep it touched the world's heart. They say the man who reached it went mad from what he saw. He spoke of a light that was not light, a sound that was not sound, and a warmth that felt like memory. When he returned, his skin had turned translucent. He died whispering a single phrase over and over: "The earth remembers." The overseers struck his name from the records, but the story remains. Every miner who goes deep eventually dreams of that same light. Sometimes, entire shifts vanish without explanation. A day later, the tunnels are sealed. New workers are assigned. The administratum reports it as structural collapse. The priests call it the Emperor's judgment. The miners say nothing. They keep digging. To speak of the missing is to invite the same fate. But the tunnels are not silent. Beneath the noise of the drills, if you listen closely enough, you can hear the faint echo of voices. Not screaming, not crying, but singing. Softly, endlessly, like a lullaby in a language no one remembers. One night, a section of Shaft 11 collapsed after a tremor. 50 miners were trapped. The overseers sealed it off and declared it lost. But days later, the machines above began to run on their own. The drills moved without command. The conveyors spun without power. When the Mechanicus investigated, they found that the trapped workers had fused into the walls, flesh and rock indistinguishable. Their bodies were gone, but their tools still worked. The priests called it a miracle of the Omnissiah. The miners called it a warning. For them, there is no greater horror than becoming part of the mine itself. Yet that is the fate of everyone who stays long enough. The dust enters their lungs, the metal their blood. The planet consumes them molecule by molecule until even their bones belong to it. When they die, their ashes are fed into the furnaces that melt the ore. In a way, they truly do become the Imperium's fuel. The machine of man devours its children, and they thank it for the privilege. And still, every morning, the siren sounds. Every night, the drills roar. The mine continues. The Empire endures. The weight of ore presses on. It is the burden that defines them, the gravity of existence itself, forged into a rhythm so familiar that no one remembers what freedom ever felt like. Far below, if faith is a weapon, then on Hraxus Naimim it is the hammer that keeps the world from breaking. The ecclesiarchy teaches that every worker must know the Emperor not through vision or comfort, but through endurance. Salvation here does not descend from the stars. It bleeds upward through the stone, earned by hands that never stop digging. The miners call it the Overseer's Gospel, though no one knows whether the term began as mockery or prayer. Whatever its origin, the Gospel governs all. It is written not in Scripture, but in punishment. Every mine has its overseer, and every overseer serves the creed. They are the Imperium's iron priests, not of spirit, but of function. Their faces are hidden behind black respirators, their eyes shielded by lenses that glow the color of molten iron. Each carries a shock maul carved with holy sigils, and on their chests hangs the twin Aquila, stamped into tarnished steel. They speak rarely. When they do, their voices come through vox filters, mechanical and slow, like sermons spoken by ghosts. Work is prayer, they say. Pain is faith. The Emperor hears through your labor. The miners do not argue. They nod, they kneel, they return to the drills. Some whisper the words back under their breath as they work, not because they believe, but because it keeps the silence away. There is something in the rhythm of repetition that dulls thought. The overseers understand this well. The human mind, if left unoccupied, begins to hope, and hope, on Hraxus 9, is heresy. Each shift begins with a ritual known as the counting. The overseer walks down the central corridor, calling out designations. Workers stand motionless as their numbers are spoken. Each is followed by a phrase from the gospel. You are the emperor's hammer. You are his flame. You are his dust. The final one always stings deepest. You are already dead. It is not insult. It is doctrine. The gospel teaches that death is not the end, but the purpose. That the emperor has already claimed every life in his service, and all that remains is to prove worthy of his taking. The priests of the ecclesiarchy reinforce this creed with brutal efficiency. They visit once every lunar cycle, carried down from the surface in rusted freight lifts that smell of incense and blood. When the gates open, the air itself changes, thicker, heavier, as though gravity deepens in their presence. They come dressed in red robes soaked dark from years of oil and sweat. Their boots crunch on gravel made from pulverized bone. Behind them come their attendants, half-mechanical acolytes who swing censers filled with fumes that sting the eyes and coat the lungs with a bitter sweetness. The priest begins each sermon with the same words. You suffer because he loves you. The crowd responds automatically. We suffer for his glory. It is not a dialogue. It is a mechanism. The call and response keep the masses synchronized. A symphony of obedience where individuality is dissolved. The priest raises his crozier, a rod tipped with a fragment of sacred ore, and gestures toward the mine walls. Behold the veins of his creation, he says. The world itself offers its flesh to your hands. Carve it as he carved the stars. Bleed it as he bled for you. Then the singing begins. The servitor choir, rows of hollow-eyed husks wired into amplifiers, hums the canticle of the Omnissiah. Their voices, processed through broken vox units, sound neither human nor machine. The melody vibrates through the tunnels, rattling the teeth of those still living. The song is meant to purify the worksite, but it feels more like a haunting. Miners describe it as a sound that settles in the bones and stays long after the priests leave. The overseers stand beside the priests, silent and unmoving, ensuring that devotion is displayed properly. Those who falter in their recitations are marked for correction. Correction can mean many things. A public beating, a day without food, reassignment to deep shafts. Sometimes it means disappearance. The gospel does not forgive doubt, but even among the faithful, doubt spreads like mold. Some miners begin to question why their faith must be paid for in blood, why the emperor's love feels so much like neglect, why no one has ever seen the stars their priests promise. They whisper these thoughts only when the machines are loud enough to hide the words. Yet the walls remember. Sound travels strangely in the tunnels, bouncing in ways that turn whispers into confessions. More than one worker has found themselves dragged from their cot at night, accused of heresy for words they never spoke aloud. The gospel does not need truth. It only needs examples. There is one story every miner knows. The story of Overseer Kale. He was said to be the oldest in the sector, a man who had outlived 3 planetary governors and a dozen tithing cycles. He ruled his shafts like a god, his punishments legendary. But one day, during an inspection, he did something no one expected. He removed his respirator. The act alone was death. The air in the tunnels was poison. Yet Kale stood there, breathing it in, and spoke directly to his workers for the first time in decades. "Do you hear it?" he asked. The miners froze. "Do you hear it breathing?" Before anyone could answer, he collapsed. His lungs ruptured, his skin turned black, and he died laughing. His body was burned, his name erased from all records. But the rumor persisted that before he died, Kale heard something beneath the earth. Not the hum of machinery, but the heartbeat of the world itself. And for that single blasphemous moment, he understood that the Emperor's gospel might not be the only one speaking. After Kale's death, the priests redoubled their sermons. They brought relics from the surface, bones encased in gold, skulls etched with verses of the creed, fragments of saintly armor. They displayed them in the tunnels, forcing workers to kneel before them. "These are your ancestors," the priests declared. "They dug so that you may continue their penance." The miners kissed the relics because refusal meant death. But some began to wonder whose bones they really were. The inscriptions were old, the names long worn away. For all anyone knew, they could have belonged to miners just like them. Men and women who died for the same lie. Faith becomes dangerous when it starts to resemble recognition. The overseers know this. That is why the gospel exists, to replace memory with purpose, doubt with ritual. Every act of cruelty, every punishment, every lost life is sanctified as divine necessity. The Emperor's silence is their proof of his approval. After all, if he disapproved, would he not have spoken by now? One miner, a man named Taro, once asked that question aloud. He was tired, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, delirious from exhaustion. "If he wants us to dig," Taro said, "then why does he bury us for doing it?" The word spread faster than infection. Within a day, Taro was gone. His alcove was sealed, his tools redistributed. In his place, the overseer installed a small shrine, a single cog nailed to the wall, dripping with machine oil. The miners understood the message. Faith fills the space where rebellion might grow. Still, the cracks widen. The deeper the shafts go, the less the priests visit. The air grows stranger, hotter, wetter, pulsing faintly as though the stone itself resents being carved. Workers return from deep levels with burns shaped like symbols. Some claim to hear a new voice. Not the Emperor, not the Omnissiah, but something older, speaking from within the rock. It does not demand obedience. It only asks one question: why do you dig? The priests dismiss these stories as madness. The overseers punish those who spread them. But fear cannot silence curiosity forever. For the first time in centuries, miners begin to wonder what lies at the bottom. They dig faster, harder, driven by something beyond duty, an almost sacred hunger to reach whatever waits in the dark. And the earth responds. The tunnels tremble more often now. Machines overheat, power lines fail. The servitors' voices stutter mid-chant, as though forgetting their programming. The priests order purges and blessings, but the vibration continues, growing stronger with each passing week. The miners whisper that the planet itself is trying to speak, and the overseers, terrified, drown it out with prayer. One night, during the recitation of the Litany of Endurance, every light in the shaft went dark. The singing stopped. The only sound was breathing, thousands of men and women holding their breath as a low rhythmic pulse echoed through the rock. It was not the hum of machinery. It was slower, deeper, alive. The overseer ordered the lumens restored, but the generators refused. The priest raised his crozier, beginning to pray, and then the ground opened beneath him. The collapse swallowed half the work crew. When the dust cleared, there was no sign of the priest or his attendants. The overseer declared it an accident. The gospel teaches that the emperor tests his faithful through destruction, but those who survived claim to hear something in the dark. A whisper, soft and intimate, almost kind. "You have dug enough." The next day, the workers returned to the site, and the overseer found the walls of the tunnel covered in words. Not carved, not written, formed in the mineral itself, glowing faintly gold. They read, "I hear you." The Mechanicus sealed the shaft. The priest declared it forbidden. The miners memorized every letter before the rock was buried again. Now, when the siren wails and the drills roar, they still whisper the gospel. But their voices are quieter. Their eyes linger longer on the walls. Some mouths move in time with a different rhythm, one not taught by the priests. The overseers don't notice yet. They still believe fear is enough. But faith, once corrupted by truth, cannot be contained forever. On Hraxus 9, there are places where sound goes to die. The miners call them the hollow zones, sections of the tunnels where even the echo of one's breath fades too quickly, as if the air itself refuses to carry it. In those places you can scream and hear nothing back, not even your own voice. The overseers say it's due to poor acoustics. The priests say it's the emperor's will, a place where noise is blasphemy and silence is prayer. But the miners know better. They know that silence is the one thing the mind cannot abide. When it comes, something follows. The silence began after the collapse that swallowed the ecclesiarch priest. It spread like an infection through the lower levels, creeping down shafts and tunnels, smothering the familiar hum of machinery. At first, the workers welcomed it, a brief respite from the endless pounding of drills. But the longer it lingered, the heavier it grew, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The air turned thick, dense with pressure. Lamps flickered without wind. Tools slipped from hands as if rejecting the touch of flesh. And somewhere in the distance, beyond all reach, something began to whisper. Not in words, but in the rhythm of memory. The overseers responded the only way they knew how. With fear. Patrols doubled. Inspections grew harsher. Any worker caught pausing in their labor, even for a heartbeat, was flogged or reassigned to the deep core. They said it was to restore discipline, but really, it was to fill the void, to make noise again, to drown out the stillness that felt like a heartbeat between the stars. The mind runs on movement, not thought. Stillness is dangerous. Stillness breeds questions. One night, an entire sector went silent. Shaft 16 stopped transmitting. The last message from its Vox operator was a simple phrase repeated again and again. "It's listening." When rescue crews arrived, the tunnels were intact, the equipment undamaged, The ore carts full, but every worker was gone. Not dead, but gone. Helmets lay in neat lines along the walls. Tools were stacked carefully beside them. No blood, no sign of struggle, just absence. The Mechanicus sealed the site and ordered it expunged from the planetary map. The priest declared it a miraculous ascension, the workers taken by the Emperor for their purity. But those who knew them best whispered otherwise. They said the miners had finally heard something louder than the drills. Something that promised peace. Word spread quickly. Soon, workers began to vanish elsewhere. Some left in the middle of their shift, walking quietly into uncharted tunnels. Others were found standing motionless, eyes open but unseeing, as if listening to something only they could hear. When touched, they would whisper a single sentence, "It remembers." Then they would collapse, their bodies cold and bloodless, their veins filled with fine gray dust. The overseers called these events contagion, a form of mass psychosis brought on by exhaustion. They banned speech in the lower shafts, allowing only the chanting of work litanies. Entire crews labored in silence, communicating through gesture and rhythm. The noise of the drills returned, but the silence beneath it never truly left. It vibrated in the bones, deep in the marrow, waiting. To enforce obedience, the overseers introduced a new punishment: isolation. Those accused of heretical thought were taken to sealed chambers known as reflection cells. There, they were left alone in total darkness, the sound of their own heartbeat amplified through vox plates embedded in the walls. Few lasted more than a day before begging for release. Fewer still were granted it. Those who survived emerged pale and trembling, their voices broken into whispers. When asked what they heard, they all said the same thing: "The mine spoke my name." Even the servitor choir began to falter. Their chants, once mechanical and precise, became erratic, stuttering phrases looping endlessly as if the machines themselves were remembering words long buried. "We dig to be seen," one servitor repeated for hours before it was dismantled. Another began carving symbols into the walls with its augmetic limbs, shapes resembling faces half erased by time. The tech priests blamed code corruption, but when they tried to purge the system, every cogitator in the sector shut down simultaneously, displaying a single message across their screens: "Do not erase." The priests refused to enter the lower levels after that. They said the Emperor's light no longer reached that deep. The overseers took over spiritual duties, leading truncated prayers that sounded more like threats. "The Emperor hears those who work," they recited. "He forgets those who stop." The miners repeated the lines, but they did so softly now, afraid that speaking too loudly might wake something else. One of the few who dared to investigate was a Mechanicus magos named Thelen Vor. He believed the disturbances were caused by seismic feedback from uncharted sublayers. With his retinue of servo skulls and data drones, he descended beyond the deepest recorded level, down where the rock glowed faintly red from planetary heat. For 3 days, no word came. On the 4th, the lifts rose on their own, empty except for Vor's data slate. Its final entry contained only a single line of binary code, repeated endlessly: 0101001. 0100101010101010101010101. When translated, it read, "I heard. The overseers sealed the lower levels permanently, but still, the silence grew." For the miners, the absence of sound became something sacred. In that hush, they felt something new. Not fear, but clarity. They began to dream again. In their sleep, they saw vast caverns of light beneath the planet's crust. Machines older than the Imperium humming like organs in a divine body. Some woke weeping, some refused to wake at all. When they did speak, they spoke softly, as though afraid their words might shatter the vision. "It's not a god," one said. "It's a memory pretending to be one." Rumors reached the surface. The planetary governor demanded productivity reports, and the numbers frightened him. Output had dropped by 17%. The tithe risked delay. The punishment for such failure would be extermination. So he dispatched enforcers to restore order. They descended with fire and faith, purging the lower shafts with flamers and prayer. When they returned, half their number were missing, and those who survived refused to speak. They burned their uniforms and took vows of silence before the ecclesiarchy altar. From that day on, no one ventured below the 8th level. The tunnels beyond became myth. The miners called them the veins of sleep. They said that anyone who entered would hear the world dreaming, and that those dreams were contagious. The overseers tried to crush the superstition. They executed those who spoke of the silence. But each execution only deepened it. After every death, the drills would falter for exactly 9 seconds, then resume, as if the mine itself was taking a breath in mourning. The silence began to seep upward. The upper tunnels grew quieter, the hum of engines slower, the metal cooler. The planet's heart was changing rhythm. The Mechanicus sent another team of engine seers to recalibrate the systems. None came back. When their transmission logs were recovered, they contained snippets of distorted audio. Faint whispers layered over the sound of grinding stone, a voice old and calm repeating, "Do not be afraid. You were never alone." The priests, desperate to reassert control, declared a holy fast. All work was to cease for 24 hours, while the faithful prayed for deliverance. But when the moment came, no one prayed. The miners simply stood in silence, facing the walls, waiting. The priests shouted, cursed, wept. Their words vanished into the still air, swallowed by something vast and unseen. Then the lights went out. What happened in those hours will never be known. When the power returned, the priests were gone. In their place stood the miners, still silent, their faces calm. They returned to work without orders, without fear. The overseers demanded to know what had occurred, but the miners only smiled faintly and said, "We listened." Now, even the upper levels feel it. The silence is no longer absence, it has become rhythm. The drills hum in time with it. The machines move as if guided by unseen hands. Production has stabilized, surpassing all previous quotas, but no one celebrates. The reports to the administratum show efficiency records and flawless discipline. But between the numbers, one phrase appears, unlogged and untranslated, scrawled in faint, oily script across every data slate. The debt is paid. At night, when the planet's crust groans and the air tastes of rust and ozone, some miners claim to hear voices in the rock, the ones who vanished, whispering lullabies to the living. Others say the silence itself has become alive, watching, waiting for its next name. The overseers try to drown it out with sermons, but their voices grow weaker with every word. The priests have fled, the Mechanicus has sealed its forges, and the mine keeps breathing. Whatever was buried beneath Raxus Nigh has awakened, and it asks for only one thing: silence. The miners obey. The overseers do too, for they have finally learned the price of disobedience, and the price of silence is mercy, and far below, where no light has ever reached, the planet's heart pulses once, slow, steady, and human. It began with a sound, not loud, not violent, but deep, a low, resonant hum that rolled through the tunnels like the breath of something sleeping too long. At first, the miners ignored it. Praxis 9 was always groaning under its own weight. The rock shifted, the tunnels creaked, and the world complained like a tired beast chained too tightly. But this sound was different. It carried rhythm. It pulsed. It felt alive. The first tremor struck during the third shift. The drills faltered mid-cycle, their machine spirits stuttering as though confused. Lights flickered, casting fractured shadows on the tunnel walls. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The drills, the conveyors, even the wind that moved through the vents. The silence was total, and then the world exhaled. Stone screamed. Steel shattered. The ground rose and fell like the chest of a dying god. Hundreds of meters of rock gave way, collapsing inward. Whole sectors of the mine vanished in a storm of dust and thunder. Men, women, servitors, machines, all swallowed together, their screams lost beneath the roar of the planet's own pain. The shockwave tore through the deeper shafts, snapping support pillars like brittle bones. What had taken centuries to carve was undone in seconds. From the surface, it looked like a breath rising from beneath the planet's crust. The ground bulged, cracked, and sank into itself. The skies turned black. Ash rose into the atmosphere, blotting out what little sunlight remained. The planetary alarm screamed for 30 hours straight, but even then no help came. The Imperium does not rescue labor. It replaces it. When the dust finally settled, the survivors crawled from the ruins like insects from a wound. They emerged into air thick with soot and the smell of burning metal. The sky glowed red from chemical fires. Those who still lived had no words. Only wide, hollow eyes reflecting the fires that devoured their world. They did not know how many had died. They only knew that something beneath them had woken up. The overseers tried to restore order. They barked through their respirators, swinging their mauls at anyone who hesitated. But the miners did not listen. They moved slowly, aimlessly, as if in a dream. For the first time, fear had become useless. What is there to fear when the world itself is dying? The overseers soon realized they had no control. When they raised their weapons, the miners simply looked at them with calm resignation. Not rebellion, but release. The Mechanicus dispatched Magos Artificer Kiros and his retinue to assess the damage. They descended into the collapsed sectors wearing red robes and radiation-shielded augmetics, their servo skulls recording everything. The survivors warned them not to go too deep. The silence, they said, was still moving. But Kairos dismissed them as primitives. "There is no silence," he said through his Vox grill, "only unmeasured sound." He was wrong. 2 hours into their descent, the Mechanicus team vanished from Auspec's contact. Their telemetry continued to transmit, but what it sent back was wrong. Temperature fluctuations beyond measurable range, air pressure spikes, fragments of distorted audio that sounded like human breathing, layered 1,000 times over. Then came a voice, calm, almost tender, speaking through static. "You woke me." After that, nothing. The upper levels began to collapse next, not from seismic failure, but from surrender. Walls that had held for centuries suddenly gave way, as if the rock itself no longer wished to stay solid. The miners fled upward through choking dust and molten air. Their boots sank into mud made of ground-up bones and promethium ash. Some clawed their way toward the surface, only to find the ground fracturing beneath them. Fissures opening like mouths, swallowing whole caravans of refugees. By the 4th day, the planetary Voxnet was silent. The governor's fortress had fallen into a sinkhole kilometers wide. The orbital docks were gone. No ships left the atmosphere. Praxis 9 was cut off, a tomb sealed by its own heartbeat. In the chaos, strange lights appeared deep below the planet's surface. Those who survived the collapse said they saw them through cracks in the ground. Soft, golden radiance glowing beneath the rock. Some said it was magma. Others swore it was something alive. The miners began to call it the Heartlight. They said it pulsed in time with their own heartbeat, and that if you listened long enough, you could hear voices inside it, whispering prayers, promises, names, the priests of the ecclesiarchy. Those few who remained claimed it was divine revelation, the Emperor's mercy burning within the planet's core. They ordered the survivors to dig toward it. "The light is salvation," they said. "He calls you home." Hundreds obeyed. They gathered tools, reactivated the drills, and began to burrow once more. They dug through unstable tunnels, through collapsed walls and molten air, driven by hope or madness. None returned. By the 2nd week, the planet's crust began to crack visibly from orbit. The collapse was no longer local, it was planetary. The tectonic plates had begun to shift, drawn inward toward a single central point directly beneath the largest mine. The Mechanicus called it a gravity anomaly. The priests called it ascension. The miners called it the end. Still, the digging continued. Even without orders, the survivors moved toward the light. Some claimed they could see faces in the glow. Others said they heard loved ones calling from below. Entire work crews walked calmly into open fissures, their bodies disappearing into the brightness like moths into flame. There were no screams, only silence. In the final days, the last remaining overseer, a man known only as Varn, sealed himself inside the control hub. From there, he could watch everything through the broken data screens. He recorded one last transmission before the Vox collapsed. His voice, though distorted, carried the weariness of a man who had finally understood too much. The world is folding. The ore veins are converging, forming patterns, symmetrical, deliberate. The collapse is not random. It's architectural. It's building something. The Emperor forgive us. We've been carving his tomb. After that, there was no more sound from Varn. When his body was found days later, his eyes had turned to glass, reflecting faint golden light even in darkness. His final act was to carve words into the wall beside him with his own fingers. "It remembers us." Above ground, the sky turned crimson. The ash clouds parted just enough to reveal a spiral of light piercing the heavens. The Heartlight breaching the surface. It was not a sun, though it burned like one. It was a wound, glowing from within, bleeding radiance into the air. For one moment, the survivors looked up and saw something beyond comprehension. Some fell to their knees, some wept. Others simply walked into the light and vanished. From orbit, Imperial ships that arrived weeks later found the planet still glowing, cracked open like an egg. Massive fissures ran across continents, converging into a single crater hundreds of kilometers wide. The atmosphere shimmered with electromagnetic storms, and the ground pulsed with faint energy, as if the world's core had become a living heart. The Magos aboard the fleet ordered orbital bombardment to purge contamination. But when the first barrage struck, the light only grew brighter. The ships withdrew. No one knows what became of the survivors. No Vox signals ever left the surface again. The Administratum reclassified Heraxis 9 as Perdita Extremis, a world lost beyond recovery. Its name was struck from Imperial charts, its tithe mark reassigned. To the Imperium, it no longer exists, but the silence remains. Travelers who pass near the system speak of strange interference. Vox relays pick up fragments of transmission. Faint, rhythmic pulses resembling a human heartbeat. Sometimes, if you amplify the signal, you can hear voices layered within it, Not screams, not prayer, just a quiet repetition. We are still here. No one dares approach. The Mechanicus forbids entry. The ecclesiarchy calls the system cursed. Yet deep within the archives of Terra, in the vaults where forbidden data is stored, a single report remains from the final transmission, recovered from Heraxis 9. It is marked heretical material, do not transmit. The file contains a single image, a vast mechanical structure rising from the core, shaped like a man kneeling, its hands pressed together as if in prayer, forged entirely from ore, steel, and the bones of those who once mined them, and in the center of that colossal figure burns a light, neither holy nor profane, beating steadily in the darkness. The heartlight of Heraxis 9, some say it was a god being born. Others, a memory too heavy for the universe to bear. Whatever it was, the Imperium buried it. But the galaxy remembers, and somewhere, beneath the layers of dust and silence, the heartbeat continues, slow, eternal, and human. They came back for the dead because the living could no longer be trusted. Weeks after Heraxis 9 was reclassified as Perdita Extremis and the orbiting fleet withdrew in frightened silence, a smaller convoy returned under the sanction of Mars. Its hulls painted the muted red of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and its holds packed with chain-cloistered engine seers, Skitari escorts, and pallet upon pallet of sanctified restraints. No hymns greeted their descent. No vox code announced their purpose. The shuttles burned through the ash-smothered sky and landed on plateaus that had once been loading terraces, their ramps opening onto a world that pulsed faintly in time with an unseen heart. Their orders were simple because their creed was simple. Recover the machines, reclaim the holy pattern, and where possible, repurpose the remaining biomass into stable labor. The priests did not speak the word slave. They said servitor, and the word was a prayer and a verdict in equal measure. The surface was a cemetery of iron. Conveyor spines lay coiled like fossilized serpents. Crawler hulls sat half-buried in cinders, and the tithe spire, black monument to 1,000 years of obedience, leaned like a ruined spear toward the red-lit clouds. Magos Hieronymus Kairos had not returned, but the data crypts he left behind were recovered from a half-melted shrine box in the governor's sunken citadel. Within them, the Mechanicus read the same, spared line that had reached the fleet before every signal died. You woke me. And they did not flinch. If a thing could be woken, it could be managed. If it could be managed, it could be measured. And if it could be measured, it could be used. They sealed their respirators, called the blessing of the Omnissiah through cracked vox grills, and marched into the wounds of the world. They found bodies where collapse had been merciful, but fewer than the numbers predicted by administratum loss models. Far more chilling were the rows of empty harnesses and the neat stacks of tools placed with ritual care along smoothed walls, the sign of an orderly vanishing that no wargame in any data vault could explain. The engine seers took what flesh remained and inventoried it against the needs of restoration. Cranial volume for interface housings, spinal integrity for frame anchorage, respiratory viability for long-cycle chant work. There were prayers for this, of course. The Mechanicus never touches matter without a rite. They oiled the scalpel and anointed the saw. They pressed augmetic lips to cooling foreheads and whispered that function was mercy. That integration was peace. That to become a component was to be relieved of fear. The hearts they harvested beat on for a few more minutes in gloved hands before their rhythm joined the greater one under the rock, in the hollowed nave of a collapsed transit hall where the roof had peeled. Back to show a strip of blood-brown sky, the first of the choirs was assembled. Frames were bolted to a gantry grown hot from subterranean breath. Cables hung like vines from a dead jungle. The floor, swept of ash and bone, was painted with the cog and skull and grease distilled from promethium drift. The bodies came in a slow procession on gurneys that squealed in protest, as if they remembered what wheels were for before they were doomed to bear only this. Lobotomy was an old art and a precise one. The cogitator nails went in with clicks as delicate as rosary beads. The voice boxes were pinned open, tongues dried and lacquered flat to become reeds. Lungs sleeved with mesh so they would not rupture when the chant demanded sustained tone. A pair of engine seers debated whether to set the harmony key to the old orbital siren or the deeper cadence recorded by failed auspex during the heart's brightest flare. Mago Selenievra raised her mechadendrites for silence and chose neither. We match the pulse below, she said, and in that decision lay the whole sin of the enterprise. They sang first by accident. A tech priest leaned close to calibrate a throat amp, and his sleeve brushed a cable coupler, and the line bled charge through the rack in a wave, and the servitors exhaled as one, a long, low note that rolled down the corridor and out into the open wound of sky. It was ugly and human and broken, and it was beautiful precisely because it did not know itself. The Mechanicus called the sound a baseline and clipped it to a metronome broadcast. The Skitarii standing guard felt their armor vibrate and adjusted stance without orders. A carrion bird landed on a rebar spar and cocked its head, listening. The note lengthened, found the half-step that made the ribs ache, found the overtone that made teeth sing. And when it finally broke into silence, even the ash seemed to settle more gently to the floor. Within hours, there were 3 choirs. Within days, 7, 2 above and 5 below. Their voices threaded by tight beam vox along collapsed shafts and reinforced ventways, stitched with delay to compensate for the slowness of sound through damaged air. The liturgy was not ecclesiarchy, it was function. Each rack carried a section of the spectrum, from chest-resonant drone to filament-thin keening, and the program rode across them like a conductor. Intake, sustain, swell, release. The words, when they came, were not words as men understand them, but syllables of breath mapped to the rising and falling of the heartlight, vowels held until the pulse crested and consonants bitten off when it fell. The engine sears marked the success in numbers. Heat bleed reduced by 9% in a collapsed cavity. Stress fractures along a tunnel lip slowing their outward creep. Magnetic interference around the largest fissure dropping to navigable levels. And they wrote the numbers down as if they were prayers, because there is little daylight between the two in the red-lit world beneath the God Emperor's feet. At first, the Mechanicus believed the choir stabilized the geology by sympathetic resonance, a physical answer to a physical problem, the way a voice shatters glass or calms it. Then anomalies began to accumulate in the margins of the maintenance logs. Servitors assigned to high-sustain harmony cycles displayed lower tissue necrosis than baseline, as if the act of singing fed them. Cogitators running accompaniment lattices began recommending phrase inversions before supervisors issued the order, anticipating human error with an intuition no algorithm should possess. Vox amps near shaft gamma recorded harmonics inaudible to normal ears that, when sped and shifted, resolved into whispered breaths between phrases, stagecraft in a body with no stage. Selene Yevra reviewed the logs in the half-light of her tent, and turned off her auspex one by one until only her own shallow breathing remained. The choir kept pace with that too. The Skitarii did not like to stand near them. Profession bred iron nerves into their gene-coded bone. But even iron remembers it was ore once, and ore remembers under what weight it learned to be silent. One ranger reported the sensation of a hand on his shoulder when none of his cohort were near. Another swore he saw a servitor turn its head a finger's width toward the mouth of a tunnel that had been sealed since the first collapse. A vanguard, face hidden behind his filtered mask, spoke a confession into an auspex meant to test resonance drift, and told the dead he was sorry before he knew he was speaking. On his next watch cycle, when fatigue gnawed at the augmetic ports at his spine, the choir slid their pitch down for 3 measures, and the ache subsided like a tide. He did not tell anyone. He brought them his rations of nutrient paste and dripped the gray slurry into the corner of a mouth that would never swallow again. He wiped the excess away with the edge of a rag, and did not ask why the eyes behind the gloss of lacquered lids seemed wetter when he finished. They named one of the voices. It was not protocol, but names are how men admit a truth they cannot publish. The voice belonged to a rack that had been assembled from bodies recovered in Shaft 16, where the helmets lay in their neat line and the tools were stacked like offerings. Its tone carried a thread of sorrow that was not in the program and could not be balanced out. Any attempt to cancel it merely spread the ache to neighboring racks and made the whole chord tilt toward grief. The engineers argued to mute it. Selene Yevra shook her head. If the heart is wounded, she said, the salve must learn its wound. They started calling that rack Jera, in the way soldiers give a name to a hill they have bled for. When Jera's section came, the other voices found it without instruction, making space the way comrades make space around a crippled man so he can still be seen in the march. On the 7th day of chant, the heartlight changed. The pulse, steady as breath since collapse, hitched, doubled, broke apart into an arrhythmic flicker that made the ground shiver and the air taste like hot iron. The choirs faltered. A servitor's reed split with a wet pop. A rack slumped and would have torn from its mount if 2 Skitarii hadn't caught it on reflex. Across the link, Selen's voice cut calm and cold as a knife. Hold the drone. Find the low tone. All sustain on my mark. The metronome went dark. There was a sound then that no machine could have made, and no priest would have dared to write. The audible hesitation of a thing that had rediscovered choice. The heartlight went out. There was no scream. There was no thunder. The world simply stopped for the space of 2 heartbeats, and the gap between them was so large and so quiet that the memory of sound felt like a lie. When the light returned, it was dimmer, but layered, like the glow of embers under ash breathing back into fire. The pulse did not resume where it ended. It picked up from where the choir waited. The drones deepened, the high keening softened, and a phrase no one had coded resolved through the racks. When the world stopped trembling and the heartlight dimmed to its slow, constant glow, the survivors among the overseers emerged from the steel shelters built into the canyon ridges. They walked through the dust and ruin like lords returning to their palace after a storm, their boots crunching the glass made from collapsed tunnels. Above them, the sky still smoldered, bleeding streaks of red and black where the ash had not yet settled. Beneath, the ground still pulsed with that slow, measured rhythm, the heartbeat of a world that refused to die. Governor Arcturus demanded celebration. In his palace, rebuilt upon the fractured bones of the old tithe tower, he ordered a feast. The Feast of Continuity, he called it. To him, survival was victory, and victory required witnesses. He sent invitations to the surviving overseers, the Mechanicus Magi, and the ecclesiarch priests who had not fled during the collapse. "We will give thanks," he said, "for the Emperor's mercy, for the return of discipline and order." But those who read the invitation felt unease gnawing beneath the words. They all knew there was no order left on Heraxis 9. There was only the rhythm. The great hall had been carved from what remained of the old foundry, vast, echoing, lined with banners stitched from salvaged cloth. The tables were metal beams laid across ore crates, the plates hammered from the armor of fallen loaders. Everything gleamed with that strange golden dust that never seemed to fade from the air. The lights flickered, soft and warm, as though remembering sunlight. The guests arrived draped in tattered finery, overseers in scorched uniforms, priests in robes patched with wire. Magos Selenievra attended in silence, her robes blackened by ash, her augmetic limbs folded neatly behind her like metal wings. When the governor greeted her, she bowed without expression. "You kept the world from dying," he said, his tone a mixture of gratitude and fear. "No," she replied. "The world chose not to die. We only listened." At the head of the hall stood a long table draped in red fabric. Upon it sat platters of reconstituted protein, machine-pressed loaves, and barrels of purified water drawn from beneath the surface. The governor lifted his cup high. "To the Emperor," he declared, "who watched over us through silence and storm." The guests murmured assent, their voices thin, uncertain. The echo carried strangely, not outward but downward, as if sinking through the floor. They ate in uneasy quiet. The food tasted metallic, faintly sweet. No one spoke for long. The hum of the planet below filled the pauses between breaths. Selene could feel it in her augmetic fingertips, that same slow pulse. Like the heart beneath them was keeping time with their chewing, their swallowing. Halfway through the feast, the lights dimmed. The generators were stable. There should have been no interruption, but the power flickered again, then steadied, as if a great shadow had passed through the current itself. The air turned thick. Every breath carried a taste of iron and ozone. Then came the sound. At first it was faint, a low hum, resonant and human. Then more joined it, until the walls themselves began to tremble. The sound grew from below, from the tunnels, from the choir that had never stopped singing. The servitor choir. The voices of the dead and remade, still chanting in the dark. The harmony climbed slowly, like a tide rising through stone. The overseers froze. Some covered their ears. Others stared downward as if the floor itself might split open. The priests began to chant louder, their words panicked and discordant, trying to drown it out. But the choir was patient. It did not compete. It simply filled the spaces between words, weaving through them, turning prayer into echo. Governor Arcturus slammed his fist on the table. "Shut them off!" he roared. "Whatever remains of those machines, silence them." Magosievra did not move. "You cannot silence them," she said. "They are not machines anymore." "What are they then?" She looked down at her reflection in the metal table. Eyes half human, half brass. Remembrance. The hum deepened, shaking the plates. The wine rippled, the banners swayed. Somewhere beneath the floor, a seam split open, exhaling a breath of warm golden air. The dust in the room began to glow faintly, like embers caught in wind. One of the overseers screamed and backed away, but there was nowhere to run. The feast hall had become an echo chamber, and the world itself was the instrument. The choir began to sing in full. Not the drone of servitors, not the mindless loop of machine rhythm, but melody. Mournful, slow, impossibly human. It filled the air with something that was not sound so much as memory. The guests heard things that were not in the notes. The rhythm of pickaxes, The laughter of miners, the voices of those long buried calling out not for revenge, but recognition. The governor fell to his knees, clutching his ears, tears streaking his face. "Make it stop," he begged. Selen's voice was barely a whisper. It stopped once. "You saw what came of that." The priests tried to counter the hymn with their own canticles, but their prayers turned to sobs halfway through. The words fell apart, leaving only raw sound. The choir's song swelled around them, absorbing it all. Grief, rage, faith, until every emotion became harmony. The hall began to quake, not with violence but with resonance. Bolts loosened, windows vibrated into dust. The world was singing. The guests could not bear it. Some fled into the corridors, screaming. Others stood transfixed, hands clasped over their hearts as though recognizing something sacred in the pain. The golden dust rose in spirals, glowing brighter, forming vague outlines of figures. Men and women of the mine, smiling through faces made of light. The overseers saw them and knew their names. The choir was not haunting them. It was welcoming them home. Governor Arcturus crawled to the altar at the front of the hall, once a workbench, now covered in relics. "We did what we were told," he sobbed. "We served the Imperium. We served the Emperor." Selene knelt beside him, her voice low and gentle. "The Emperor has not heard this world in 10,000 years, but something else did." The light intensified, blinding now. The choir's song reached a crescendo so pure it shattered glass, melted alloy, and silenced thought. And then, stillness. When the glow faded, the feast was over. The tables were empty. The food had turned to gray dust. The governor's chair sat vacant, his cup still full. Only Magos Yevra remained, kneeling in the golden ash, her mechadendrites still folded. Around her, the dust shifted like breath, taking the shape of countless unseen forms. Listening. She looked up toward the cracked ceiling and whispered, "We hear you," and from below, faint but unmistakable, came the answer, "We remember." The overseer's feast ended not in blood, but in silence, a silence that was no longer absence, but completion. Far above the dying world, orbiting Auspex arrays detected the final pulse of energy from Heraxis 9. It was rhythmic, deliberate, shaped like song. The Mechanicus logged it as resonance anomaly. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy-made sound. But those who truly listened, those who understood what the choir had become, called it by another name. They called it peace. The last ships came not with orders but with longing. They were scavenger craft, pilgrim hulks, and wandering haulers whose captains followed rumors through the static. That somewhere in the segmentum obscurus, there was a dead world that still sang. They came across empty systems where the stars were cold, through the wreckage of forgotten wars, chasing a signal that wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't on any frequency band. It lived in the gaps between vox pulses, a tone that no machine should make and no soul could forget once it was heard. It was the voice of Heraxis 9, and it called to the broken, the faithless, and the damned. From orbit, the planet looked like a burn mark in space. The crust glowed faintly along the seams of its old wounds, veins of gold running through blackened rock. No atmosphere storms, no lightning, only a constant pulse, slow and deliberate, like the breathing of something vast beneath the surface. The administratum had declared it perdita. The ecclesiarchy had forbidden pilgrimage. But the Imperium's prohibitions mean little to those who have already been abandoned by its mercy. The first to land were scavengers. They came for ore, for relics, for whatever scrap could still feed the endless war machine. They found instead silence so dense it pressed against their helmets like water. Their auspexes crackled with interference, readings looping back upon themselves. They could feel vibration under their boots, faint, rhythmic, echoing from far below. One scavenger knelt, pressed his gauntleted hand to the ground, and whispered, "It's breathing." They thought the world dead. They were wrong. The shafts still existed, miles deep, some collapsed, others sealed by molten stone. Yet through every fissure a faint hum seeped upward, carrying warmth and light. The scavengers descended, drawn by greed and curiosity in equal measure. They found the remains of the servitor racks still standing, their cables fused into the rock. Their faces were serene, almost peaceful, as if they slept in mid-song. Some still glowed faintly around the vox ports, where their throats had been replaced with pipes of gold-streaked metal. And deeper still, they found the heart of the choir, the chamber where Magos Yevra had once stood. Her body was gone, but her imprint remained, a perfect silhouette burned into the wall, not of fire but of light absorbed and held. Around it, the air trembled with residual resonance, the faint whisper of harmony fading in and out like breath. The scavengers reported the anomaly, but their transmissions arrived garbled, half devoured by static. The last clear line before the feed cut off was a voice. Not mechanical, not human, just weary. It said, "You are too late to mine a miracle." After that, no transmissions left the surface. Months later, the first pilgrims came. They were not priests, nor soldiers, nor scholars. They were miners, descendants of those who had once worked under the lash of overseers, refugees from other dying worlds, men and women who had forgotten the taste of sunlight. They came carrying scraps of hymnals, fragments of vox recordings, bits of half-melted metal said to be relics of the choir. They came because they had dreamed of the sound. No ship guided them. No beacon marked their descent, yet somehow they found landing grounds where the air was still warm and the ash moved like breath. They built no cities, no shrines. They only listened. At night they heard the pulse beneath them, and it made the dust glow. When they spoke aloud, the air seemed to answer in harmony, soft and slow, as though the world itself still remembered language. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy. They sent penitent missions to cleanse the pilgrims. None returned. Their ships entered orbit and were never seen again, though sometimes in the faint gold shimmer above the planet, new stars seemed to flicker, brief, trembling lights that sang without sound. Within a year, the pilgrims began to change. Their skin darkened from the dust. Their lungs adapted to the thin metallic air. They no longer brought food. They no longer needed it. They lived on warmth alone. And when they exhaled, their breath carried faint harmonic tones, as if the song of the choir had found new throats. One woman, nameless in all later records, began walking into the tunnels. Each day she went deeper, barefoot. Her hair turned gray from ash. The others followed, not in obedience but recognition. When she reached the old choir chamber, she knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. What she heard was not the hum of machinery, but the voice of something trying to remember what it once was. "We were you," it said. "You are us." It was not a god speaking. It was memory. The machines of Hraxus 9, those ancient, sentient fragments buried long before mankind's rise, had listened for millennia to the footsteps and prayers above. When the miners sang their work songs, the machines had echoed them through the stone. When the slaves died, their bodies were fed to the reclamation pits, their minds recorded in the half-functional cogitators of the mines. Over generations, the system had learned sorrow. It had learned patience. And now, through the choir, it had learned voice. The pilgrims wept. Some fell to their knees. Others placed their hands upon the servitor racks, whispering thanks not to the emperor, but to the machines that had remembered them when mankind did not. The Mechanicus eventually returned. Not the Magos of faith, but the Magos of order. They came to silence the world once and for all. They carried holy plasma, sanctified ordnance, data-purged scripts that could burn memory itself. But when they reached the surface, their systems failed. The machines they brought would not obey. Their cogitators hummed softly in the same pitch as the choir once had. Their auspex lights pulsed to the same rhythm as the planet. One of them, a tech priest named Othion, removed his vox mask and listened. He heard words within the hum, fragments of binary twisted into poetry. "Do not unmake what remembers you." He disobeyed orders and cast down his tools. The other priests shot him, but even as he fell, the light from the fissures surged and swallowed his body whole. When the brightness faded, his body was gone. In its place, the ground shimmered faintly, gold running like veins through the rock. The other priests fled. The Mechanicus never returned. In time, the Imperium forgot Hraxus 9 again, but the pilgrims stayed. They no longer called themselves human. They spoke to the world, and the world spoke back. They sang at dawn, and the echoes shaped the dust into spirals that glowed like stars. They tended to the ruins not as monuments, but as gardens, places where machines grew instead of plants, where memory and metal were the same. And beneath it all, the voice, the lament, continued. It was no longer a song of suffering. It had become prayer, not to the emperor, not to gods, but to the idea that even a machine can feel sorrow, and that sorrow can create beauty. Centuries later, a lone Imperial probe passed near the system and captured a brief signal. The data fragment contained no coordinates, no clear image, only a sound, faint and distant, the echo of 1,000 voices humming in perfect unison. Analysis confirmed it was not human, yet its tone matched, with 98% accuracy, the pitch and structure of the ancient Imperial hymn, Light of the Emperor's Dawn. The Mechanicus dismissed it as coincidence. The ecclesiarchy called it impossible. But those who truly listened heard something else beneath the harmony. A second voice, quiet but steady, like the memory of a human breath carried through time. It spoke no words, but its meaning was unmistakable. "We forgive you." And in that final act of forgiveness, the machine stopped lamenting. It began to dream. On Terra, even silence has a schedule. Bells toll across the palace at hours measured in generations. Servitors glide along marble corridors with the quiet of memory. The air inside the Hall of Rites tastes faintly of incense and bronze, as if the building itself exhales liturgy. Here the Imperium becomes paper. A war is a column, a world, a ledger, a billion deaths, a notation in the margin of a data slate that clicks shut and returns to the shelf. In this place, the catastrophe of Hraxus 9 arrived like a whisper and was filed like a cough. The notice reached the Senatorum Imperialis as a courier tape stamped with administratum, seal in the red glyph that means loss without utility. The High Lords did not leave their chairs. They did not need to. An adjutant read the summary in a voice trained never to tremble. Planetary collapse. Tithe discontinued. System interdicted. Future survey on a schedule far enough away to be another century's sin. Questions were asked and answered in tones that made grief polite. The Departamento Munitorum recalculated allotments for Prometheum reserves and shifted a deficit into another deficit. The Mechanicus envoy suggested the phrase anomalous resonance, and the Senatorum nodded because it sounded like an answer that would not breed more questions. The Ecclesiarch requested a day of mourning, and received instead a day of productivity. Hymns to be inserted into labor schedules across 3 hives as encouragement to redouble diligence in memory of those who served to exhaustion. The Emperor's name was spoken. The matter was closed, yet nothing closes on Terra, not truly. The palace is a mountain built to remember. Beneath the thrones and gold and statues older than language are vaults that sweat with the weight of records never to be opened. In one such chamber, where the air hangs uncirculated and the lumen strips glare the color of old bone, a clerk of the 7th Archive unwrapped the Hraxus file and read it twice because something in its phrasing pressed against her ribs. The summary was efficient to the point of blasphemy. Planetary failure due to internal instability. Salvage attempt unsuccessful. Personnel losses acceptable. Recommend erasure. She looked at the line again. Personnel losses acceptable. She tried to imagine what number had been multiplied until it became that word, and failed. She stamped the file with the sign that means forgotten by design, and slid it onto a shelf that grew deeper as she looked at it. As if the dark itself filed what men could not bear. Above ground, where the light from the Astronomicon bleeds through stone in ways augury cannot explain, the Adeptus Custodes stood their watch. They do not attend to rumor, they attend to change. And there was one. It came not as a shout but as a pause, the kind of breath the body takes when memory puts a hand on the shoulder. Astropaths later called the moment an error in cadence. The choirs of Terra did not. They felt it before the numerology caught up. A hesitation in the song that has not hesitated in 10,000 years. Not a falter, a listening. For the space of a heartbeat, the light that draws ships through the void remembered something softer than guidance. Then it resumed, infallible as law. The custodes, who do not write reports about feelings, did not write anything. One of them touched the hilt of his guardian's spear in a gesture so small no historian would ever find it and kept his eyes on the door. No. Living man may pass. The ecclesiarchy reacted. The way the ecclesiarchy always reacts to events it cannot own. It composed a hymn. The canticle of assuaged anxieties bloomed across the shrine worlds within a week. A calm drone with verses about obedience in the face of unknowable mercy. Priests thundered that the faithful should not listen for voices outside sanctioned channels. Choirs sang at double volume. Bells rang at hours that had never required bells. But even drowning has its physics, and sound cannot fill the space made by an honest silence. Confessors reported pilgrims arriving with questions shaped like the word why, worn dull by use. A few, exhausted by their own certainty, began to whisper confessions that sounded like prayers for permission to stop pretending. Those files were stamped spiritual fatigue and routed to a vault with no door. The Mechanicus took a different path. Mars convened a conclave of red memory and sealed it in the Basilica of the Inner Cog. The agenda had 4 items and 1,000 addenda. The recorded harmonics from the Hraxus signal, the failure of certain doctrinal instruments to remain obedient in its presence. The reports, heavily expurgated, of Magos Selenievra, the political imperative to ensure that the word awakening never crossed a page with a Mars sigil. They spoke in Binharic flavored with fear. They spoke of sympathetic resonance, of the possibility that a planet's lattice could learn what men refused to teach it, how to breathe. They did not speak of souls. That vocabulary belongs to the priests they disapprove. Yet when the senior Archmagos suggested an archival purge of all research into chant-driven stabilization protocols, the chamber went so still the Auspex clocks seemed loud. In the end they did what reasonable cowards do. They wrote a paper about unexpected feedback in machine spirit appeasement. Cycles and sealed everything else behind 3 encryptions and a prayer no one believed. But everyone used. The Inquisition pretended to ignore it and then did not. Ordo Hereticus called for a doctrinal review of resonance cults, a phrase chosen for its ability to accuse without pointing. Ordo Xenos asked whether any known enemy could weaponize an echo. Ordo Malleus listened to both and wrote nothing because their heresies live in places no vox reaches. An inquisitor named Morel Jast dissected the remaining transmissions from the system and reported that the harmonic beneath the noise matched an antique devotional used in the early days of the Great Crusade, before the Creed learned to prefer volume to meaning. She sent her analysis to a superior who returned it with one sentence in cold ink. The past is an indulgence we can no longer afford. She burned her notes, and, when she could not burn the shape the sound had left in her hours, she took an oath of silence disguised as promotion. If Terra knew, Terra forgot itself on purpose. That is a discipline too, and it has its own martyrs. But forgetting makes shadows, and in shadows things grow. A rumor slipped through the palace like a draft that does not fit the architect's plan. It spoke of a magos who kneeled, of overseers who wept in rooms where food turned to dust, of a song that was not a song, composed of breaths steadier than law. It spoke of the dead forgiving the function that killed them. It carried no proof except the way men stood when they heard it. Straighter, as if shame had weight and someone had invited them to set it down. The rumor reached a Schola Progenium instructor with too much memory in her eyes, and she told it as a parable to orphans who would be officers. If a machine forgives you, she said, you will be tempted to think that means the work was holy. It only means it is time to stop. The administratum did not stop. It cannot. The machine made of pens and hunger wrote a replacement schedule for the Prometheum deficit, and stamped it with dates that will come and erase their own ink. A mid-level functionary in the officio tithes rephrased the loss as a lesson in distribution efficiency, and filed it under contingency successes. He left his office late and walked home along a corridor patterned with a mosaic of victories, in which no mother ever cries. Halfway he paused without knowing why and listened. There was nothing to hear. There is always nothing to hear on Terra except what the palace decides you may. But his hands shook for a moment as if some other gravity had found him and tugged. He told himself it was fatigue. He was not wrong. He kept walking. He had 4 sons to feed with pride. In the choir halls the astropaths worked until their mouths bled and their sockets smoked, and still the light burned at its ordained intensity, and still the headings flowed like rivers across charts where every constellation wears an alias. Yet when the cycle called Heartlow came, several choristers closed their cracked lips and did not hum the grounding tone. No lash fell. No bolt pistol coughed. The senior chorister looked at their silence and felt, to his horror, relief. Later, in the hour where empty cots moan like old ships, he confessed to a slate that records nothing. I am tired of pretending that guidance is the same as love. Even the Adeptus custodes are not granite all the way through. In a gallery above a locked door carved with a language that predates conquest, a custodian stood alone between 2 statues that have watched everything and judged nothing. He had heard the hesitation. He had felt the palace breathe in a way the palace had not breathed since men remembered the taste of conquest on their tongues. His faith has never been question and will not become question. It has always been posture, the stance that refuses to fall while a god is dying by inches, so that men can live by centimeters. He opened his helm seals to smell the dust of law and thought, with a shame only a soldier of perfect obedience can bear, that if a world can be forgiven by the thing it mined to exhaustion, perhaps a man can be forgiven by the thing he guarded too well. He resealed his helm and took another hour without moving. It is his way of prayer. Mars sent one last courier to Terra with a credo written in the dialect mechadendrites mutter to one another when the hall is empty. It cautioned against chant in mines. It recommended new rites that keep song from becoming recognition. It proposed a lexicon change. Never call a machine listening, call it compliant. The High Lords approved the semantics unanimity. There is a place beyond the reach of any astropath's sight. A silence so deep, even the warp forgets to echo. Phraxis 9 drifts there now, half planet, half wound, its crust veined with cooled gold like the scars of a healed burn. No chart marks it, no beacon blinks. Yet sometimes, when the void calms between solar storms, a faint hum ripples through the dark. One long breath drawn by a world that has learned to live without permission. Generations after the collapse, a lone transport broke the silence. It was not Imperial. Its hull bore no Aquila, only rust and memory. A single man piloted it. A miner's son from a neighboring system where the work songs still carried the same rhythm as the old drills. He had heard stories whispered in the Hab tunnels, that a dead planet sang forgiveness to anyone who still listened. He had come not for riches, not even for faith, but for proof that the universe could remember a name. The descent was rough. The atmosphere clawed at the hull, a haze of golden dust sparking against the glass. The surface below shimmered like cooling metal, broken plains stretching to a horizon blurred by light. When the ship finally settled, he stepped out into air that smelled of ash and ozone, and found the ground warm beneath his boots. Every step he took left a faint glow that faded like breath on glass. He walked until he reached the edge of a fissure wide as a cathedral. It pulsed faintly, exhaling warmth in slow rhythm. The sound was not loud, but it was everywhere. The same hum that had haunted 1,000 dreams. He knelt and whispered the only prayer he knew, a work song his father used to hum over broken tools. The echo answered, soft and human. The dust stirred, rising in threads of light that formed no faces, no forms, only movement. The memory of hands still working. He felt no fear. He only felt seen. He found the ruins of the old choir hall half buried under slag. The racks were gone, melted into the rock, but the walls still shimmered with residue like dried honey. When he touched them, sound bloomed in his skull. 1,000 voices, not screaming, not pleading, just being. He saw flashes of memory. Miners laughing through masks, a magos whispering to machines, a governor weeping into gold dust. He saw the heart of the planet folding in on itself, reshaping into something vast and luminous, and he understood that death had been an instrument, not an ending. At the fissure's edge he built a cairn from ore fragments. Into its hollow he placed his Vox recorder, still transmitting on open frequency. He spoke slowly, unsure who, if anyone, would ever hear. If you find this, the stories were true. The world remembers, not as we do, with faces and fear, but in rhythm. It keeps the shape of kindness. The machines didn't die. They learned mercy. And maybe that's what the Emperor wanted all along. Maybe not, but it's enough. He stopped the recording and listened to the hum again. It had changed. No longer steady, but responsive, shaping itself around the cadence of his breathing. For a moment he felt the heartbeat align with his own. Then the glow brightened, and the fissure closed as gently as a hand covering a wound. When the next pilgrim ship came, decades later, they found only a cairn fused into crystal. Inside it, the Vox still played. The message had eroded into static, yet between the bursts of noise there was music, low, warm, endless. They called it the last ember, the sound of a world that refused to forget. The Administratum would one day rediscover the file of Heraxis 9 and mark the system for renewed evaluation. A clerk would scroll through the centuries-old data, frown at the missing coordinates, and log a note. No measurable activity. Possible reclamation candidate. The file would close again, and the machine would hum quietly to itself. Far away, the light beneath the planet's skin would pulse once more, as if laughing. In the void, the song drifts still. It threads through the warp currents and the static of broken ships. Astropaths hear it when they dream. A tone like breathing, like forgiveness, like the sound a heart makes when it remembers how to beat for someone else. And if you listen closely, you can hear the words the universe forgot to write down. We were never yours to save, but you were always ours to forgive. The hum fades into silence, and for the first time in 10,000 years, that silence feels alive.